Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca, pronouns she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary arts space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. We have a series of classes before our next in conversation with Valerie Smith and Monica Lee Weatherly on August 19th. There's a class with poet Cynthia Marie Hoffman titled Write To, which will be July 27th, followed by a class on revision with poet Jose Angel Araguz on August 1st. And then on August 9th, we have a first two-part class with poet Daniel B. Summerhill. And registration is open for all of this right now. So please check our website at thenotebookscollective.com. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate culture, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. And as we do this land acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror across the globe and in our very own country. Our thoughts are with them. We know that these are very stressful times, and we are glad that you were able to join us tonight to be in community with each other. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Lisa to introduce our presenters.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the other half of the team at the Notebooks Collective. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Simone Weil said that. Attention as a way forward, as a way to find compassion with ourselves and others. As poets, attention is our life's purpose, to note the smallest of details, to give them a voice and connect them to some emotion. Mary Oliver wrote, "Attention without feeling, I began to learn, is only a report. And openness and empathy was necessary if the attention was to matter." And so it matters to our guests tonight. Their attention to the world in its quirks, confessions, diatribes, absurdities is why we come to read them. From a one-legged crow to shark teeth, from naming animals to being trapped in a fairy tale's text, these poets investigate through deep attention, and we are more than grateful for it. I'll now introduce them. Brandel France de Bravo's third collection of poems, Locomotive Cathedral, was selected in the Backwaters Press contest, an imprint of the University of Nebraska Press, March 2025. She is the author of two previous poetry books, Provenance and the chapbook Mother Loose. Her poems and essays have appeared in Best American Poetry, 32 Poems, Barrow Street, the Cincinnati Review, the Georgia Review, Seneca Review, South Humanities Review, and elsewhere. She is co-author of the parenting book, Trees Make the Best Mobiles, Simple Ways to Raise Your Child in a Complex World, and editor of the bilingual anthology, Mexican Poetry Today, 2020 Voices. Marcela Sulak is the author of 5 poetry collections, most recently The Fault, the National Jewish Book Awards finalist, City of Papers, and the lyric memoir Mouthful of Seeds, 2020. She's co-edited the Rose Medal Press title, Family Resemblance, an anthology, an exploration of 8 hybrid literary genres, which, as an aside, is an amazing book. A translator from the Czech, French, and Hebrew, Sulak's work has been recognized by PEN and NEA Fellowship, and the NEA Fellowship. Sulak is managing editor of the Illinat Review, and she directs the Shane D. Rudolph Graduate Program in Creative Writing at Barrow University. Please welcome Brandel and Marcela.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. It is such an honor and a pleasure and a delight to be here. And Brandel is one of my favorite people to talk to. And so I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled. I know some of you are nodding your heads, you know what I mean. And it's just such an honor and a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with her.
Likewise, Marcella, I love the way the others dropped away and it's just us here. And it feels like we'll pretend we're alone in a room doing what we don't get enough time to do together because we live in far-flung places and move around a lot, which is to talk about some of the things that matter to us most. So again, thanks to you for making time for this conversation, because I know you're traveling now. Maybe you'll let folks know where you are right now, and I'll do the same, and where you're headed.
Yeah.
And that before we launch into some poems.
All right. So I am at my brother and sister-in-law's lovely place in Needville, Texas, which is a very tiny town southwest of Houston. Um, and I am en route to a wonderful residency that I'm going to have in Costa Rica for 3 weeks. And I've never been to Costa Rica before, so I'm very excited. And I'm also just excited to have 3 weeks to work. So,
Oh, yeah, that sounds amazing. Amazing, amazing. And I remember when you were applying to that. So some of you know, I live part of the year in Mexico. My husband's Mexican. I'm in central Mexico in San Miguel de Allende. And I'm a native Washingtonian. So the rest of my time, that's where I was born. The rest of my time I spend in Washington, D.C., part of that community there. So here we are today, and we have two relatively new books. Mine came out in March, and yours came out the previous summer, correct? Or
2024.
yeah,
It's a year. It's a year
in
old.
1 year. Yeah.
Mhm.
So thought it would be fun, and Marcela, I think you agreed that maybe we could just set the stage for these two books, your book, The Fault, and my book, Locomotive Cathedral, and maybe just talk a little bit like how The Fault came about, how it became a book, and how it fits into, for lack of a better word, oeuvre,
Right.
your body of work. It's now, 5 collections of poetry, right? So yeah, where does The Fault land? And how is it similar to or different from your previous works?
All right, thank you. Um, I have always felt a little bit like, well, I know the imposter syndrome is real. But I have always felt like I never knew what I'm doing at any given time in my life because I was the first person in my extended family to go to university, the first person to move out of Texas, the first person to go abroad. I'm the first person to do a PhD. I'm the only person anybody ever knows that is in academia. And I never had that many guides or any, real guides to show me. And so in a way, this book is the culmination of this feeling. I feel like, Hansel and Gretel following breadcrumbs into a forest. And this is in some ways a COVID book in that the forest kind of, all the monsters kind of felt like they were coming out. But also it is the culmination of my work as a translator. I translate from Czech. I translate fairy tales. These things are often pedagogically useful because they teach communities how to behave, um,
Mm.
and they show the values that communities have. My first work was inspired by the environment. I grew up on a rice farm. And so I loved, the names of things. My first book it's the history of fruits and vegetables. It's the history of agriculture told in sonnets. And then, it just kind of continued. My books have tended to talk about how humans behave. Another book was called Decency. It's based on etiquette and manners books because a lot of times people didn't know how to communicate. Rulers were different culture, a different language, a different religion than the people they were ruling. And so those books are useful when you find yourself in strange situations. And so that coupled with my translation work, I've always looked at environment and human relations, translation and transformation, and sort of all of the work that I did. And so this book, and I know, Brandel, I'm going to throw a curveball because we did talk about what we were going to read, but I feel like one thing that this book, I'm going to read from Storyboard because this poem at
Mhm.
the end of the book kind of shows how this came to be. In this story, I am the bad witch of the West, the evil stepmother, the siren, that kind of thing. This is just a mock up. We can work out the details later. In this story, I make everyone feel like shit. The less I appear in the story, the bigger I grow. I do not like it here in this particular story, and the other characters resent it when I try to escape into the double space between each full stop and the double space between paragraphs or the single space between words. I've tried them all. I should have been using sans serif here because they are always catching me by the serif and pulling me back in. Without me, the words would have no spaces and nothing would make sense. And the reason I wanted to bring that up, and I can also talk about double life, which Brandel, I know is one of your favorites here, is that I'd reached a point where, at a certain point in your life, you're supposed to feel like you're starting to make sense. You get tenure and you're directing a program and your children haven't died and they're growing up and, you've raised them. And at a certain point, you just feel like, there should be some rest. You should be on autopilot a little bit. And then you find that all those things, nobody aspires to be the stepmother. Nobody aspires to be the witch figure. Nobody aspires to be these things. And you find yourself being placed in these by others. And so it's just a weird sensation. So I cribbed a lot from Sabrina Ora Mark, who wrote her beautiful Happily column in the Paris Review. And now, she has the book Happily. And I really was interested in her use of archetypes to sort of describe the situation that she felt herself in. And the second thing that inspired the book is that I had a terrible accident 7 years ago. I was hit by a truck and my lung was deflated and I thought I was dying. I should have died. And I remembered I had a daughter and I needed to try to live. So I did. And so those are the two stressors. And so this one I'll read and then I'll stop is called Double Life. Walking home along the Yarkon River, I'm wondering what a decomposing human body looks like at 3 months. It's odd how there are no books for that. No, what to expect when you've stopped expecting. What is the inverse of your baby is now the size of a grapefruit? I am this decomposition, and at the same time alive on the earth above. And the dull pain of moving my head from side to side, up and down, is exciting. Feels so good. I'm dressing up as a witch and Maya as a vampire for Halloween. Women who aren't expected to smile. We pretend they're only costumes. Every year I recall my grandmother of blessed memory who complained that her nursing home roommate in a near vegetative state was spoon-fed every day, but my grandmother who had to feed herself paid the same rent. I loved her pleasure in complaining. My mother who would answer grandmother's calls and leave the phone for half an hour at a time to do the dishes and the laundry and then pick it back up to say, every now and then, always said my grandmother delighted in complaining. It was a joy to her. My body is here on earth, not composing complaints with my grandmother's, where I am imagining the worms and gases would have parted the bones eventually and given the buried body a modicum of relief in an otherwise afterworld of stillness. Because still I wake with pain and lie in place too long. How had I come to be crushed on the roadside like an animal, just as I'd begun to leave my life? And I'd felt myself reaching for what came next. I'd remembered I had a daughter, and my daughter became the nail on which the soul catches when reaching out. And the helicopter blades of the life flight protested loudly through the spiritual air till any angels would have had to move out of the way or be sliced. I couldn't see out the window to tell. And yet there is delight where I can find it. Today it is the artichokes I patted into the soil whispering, grow, grow, it will be okay. And the man's boyish body stabbing into mine and holding my hand after, and holding my arms in a shroud-like embrace until I always wake and move somewhere else. And even then no one lets me rest in peace, for here he comes looking for me to ask, what is it? And it wakes me again every time, and I don't have an answer for what it is I am now. Okay.
I love, love, love that poem, as you know, and I love the pairing with the previous because there's sort of that sharp font thing comes, there's a kind of a bridge there of how you get hooked onto life. Your daughter hooks you back. So beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if people listening probably don't know yet, but The Fault is also kind of like a little novella in a way, because it's about as much as any book of poems can be about, it's got an arc to it. It's about kind of the dissolution of a relationship, a partnership, and it's funny. It's filled with bizarre fairy tale-like aspects, and where sort of objects come to life or have feelings, and even abstractions have feelings. And yeah, it's just a great thing. So I hope people will get more of a flavor for all of that as we go. I guess I'll try to talk a little bit about Locomotive Cathedral. Very different book. I only have 3 books of poems, one of which is a chapbook. So each of my books has been kind of project-like in a way. Locomotive Cathedral maybe is a little looser. My first book, Provenance, which is at the time that Marcela and I got to know each other, actually, it was in 2009, 10, around that time, was really based on etymologies, the origins of words. They were kind of riffs on sort of somewhat randomly selected words, 26 words, one for each letter of the alphabet, and then some other poems sort of intermingled that were more personal nature. And that was a blast, but it was kind of a project book. And then the book that followed, Mother Loose, became a project book. That was my original intention. My original intention was to, similar to Marcella, I had this interest in maybe not fairy tales as much as Mother Goose rhymes, which are, a close cousin. Their darkness, their somewhat opacity, their strangeness, the way they, you're taught them at a very young age, and you recite them without really thinking about the meaning, and then later as an adult you go back and look at it and you think about, Peter Pumpkin Eater, what was he doing putting that woman in a pumpkin shell? What's that all about? So what happened was I wrote a bunch of poems based on nursery rhymes, on Mother Goose rhymes, and then my mother had developed terminal cancer. So what happened was I intermingled poems about losing my mother, Mother Loose, with the Mother Goose rhymes. And then this book, Locomotive Cathedral, like The Fault, it was largely written during the pandemic, right? I mean, and I went into it with the idea of sort of this idea of transformation based on a meditation practice that I have called Tonglen, which is about breathing in a visualization of suffering and imagining that by breathing it in and bringing it into contact with your heart. I know it sounds a little woo-woo if you don't, but bring into contact with what's good inside of you, you're able to breathe out the antidote, whether it's for yourself or for the other person suffering. So it kind of took off, which is called colloquial. This practice is called taking and giving, or giving and taking. So this idea of taking and giving and transformation was what undergirds Locomotive Cathedral. And my dear friend Jennifer Martelli, who's on this, helped me title it. The phrase Locomotive Cathedral is in one of the essays. It is a hybrid book. It's got essays as well as poems. It talks about a locomotive cathedral, and it kind of captured again this idea of give and take, and the tension between something that you just talked about, which is this sort of, the propulsive forward motion of life versus this inner desire maybe to hold still or to attain something like eternity, right? So I'm going to read, I think I'm going to start off with the preface poem, the poem that opens the book, which also introduces one of the characters in the book, who happens to be a one-footed crow, who, because it was the pandemic, and because I was alone a lot during the pandemic, my husband and I were separated by the Mexico-US border. He was in Mexico, I was in the US, and we couldn't really be together for many, many months, almost 6 months. for a variety of reasons, not worried about not being able to cross back if a health issue arose and things like that, him having an elderly mother here in Mexico. And during that time, as many of you know, I lived in a very urban apartment in DC, and I had no greenery. So I was trying to bring wildlife and greenery into my very concrete life. And this one-footed crow began visiting me, and I began feeding him. And so began the relationship. And I want to, Renee appears throughout the book. And interestingly, Marcela in her book, The Fault, also has these kind of totemic-like animals or muse-like things that I want to get to that. But right now, you'll meet Renee, who is the crow. Regard the other as a verb. I don't eat crow, I feed crow. My crow isn't my crow. I name the crow because I'm human and want to know how a god feels. When I use my app to ID a tree, I pronounce it Osage orange. I bask in my beneficence. I'm the Pope, tossing blessings from a balcony. The crowd pecks at them, gobbles them up. I'm not so different from a pigeon. What appears to be strutting is gracelessness on earth. Renee is perspicacious and has only one foot. Strutting is out of the question. If I stare at my balcony long enough, he will glide toward it, flat as a black manta ray. He is my lesson in looms large. Every visit is a spell. The sun has a brief brownout, and I turn a little electric. Maybe the crow and I are planets. He likes orbs, grapes, and blueberries. Sometimes his eating and my reading align, and then he leaves. A lesson in recede. I watch until he bends around a building. I have a special whistle to call him, but he's not a dog. The dachshund next door barks for hours when my neighbor goes out. Renee caws on my railing for what seems like hours. This is my lesson in forgiveness. He caws for me, for food, for me with food, for me to count 1, 2, 3, and throw kibble for him to catch. Every time I'm with him, I have to reprimand myself. Want, use your indoor voice. I didn't have another poem picked out, but I could roll right into another poem. Should I do that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Doesn't take much, right, for us poets. Oh, read another. So I'll read a short prose poem that it's early in the book, but it's part of a series, a bunch of poems in the book sprinkled throughout that begin with resilience. So there's resilience 1, resilience 2. It was a term, an idea, particularly needed during COVID. And I would say as necessary now, maybe even more so. A lot of them do deal with climate change, as this one does. Resilience 1. Like restaurant carp, we are learning to live in this aquarium. Whenever a whiff of mildew finds me, I imagine the taste of the cashier's mints, as good as bleach. Yesterday, I woke up peering through the slats of my bed and thought, I sleep on a bridge. The sea visits several times a year, like a family member from the mainland who stays too long. On the radio, they say it's rising, but who are we to stop it? I tie knots in the curtains, hang bags of rice I cannot cook on the clothesline, anchor every plastic chair with what must stay dry. The sewing machine I use to hem our skirts, pants, 3 times now, and cardboard boxes of family photos, foreign magazines, birth certificates, letters home, a diploma. The baby naps in her hammock, quiet catch, while my son pushes a flip-flop across the kitchen pond, making motor sounds with his mouth. In a few years, he will join his father and the other fishermen. The jerry cans of drinking water, half full, are chained like floating dogs. I miss our rooster's kikiriki, but an ear acquires new habits. Every liquid footstep bubbling inside me like oxygen.
Yeah, thank you, Brandel. I feel when I hear those poems, especially the first one that opens the book, so much tenderness and openness to the world.
Mhm.
You, just the conversation that we're having with Renee, it is not a hierarchical conversation. And so there's something childlike in the best sense of the word here in this non-judgmental examination of the world and all of its parts. And even things that I love, like we think of dad jokes that are corny and silly, but we love them because the person who's saying them we love, right? And so this book has those kind of equivalents as well, the puns and just this willingness to get on your hands and knees and examine all the things of the earth is really, really beautiful in this book. And I really appreciate that. I have to say, when I read this and I think about our pairing, I kind of feel like, your book is, I think we cover human nature. This book is really the book that I wrote, The Fault, is angry and it's throwing temper tantrums and it's not showing my best self at all. And yours is wonderful because yours shows the human potential to let go of the ego and to just examine and to commune with and to learn. And it's really beautiful. And so I think it's a nice balance because sometimes we need to throw temper tantrums and sometimes we need to just breathe in and out. And right. So
Thank you for saying that. That's one of the things I love about The Fault is the kind of, I mean, it gives voice to the voice that all of us have inside. The voice of, there's a voice of resentment. There's a voice of wanting space for oneself, which what writer doesn't want that, and doesn't feel sometimes that their time is threatened or encroached upon. And I feel that. I mean, there's something the speaker of The Fault is a kind of a person that I totally identify with. And in fact, in Locomotive Cathedral, there are some sort of nastier voices, sometimes in a persona. And then, there's one poem which we can talk about later when we get to sort of spiritual matters. There's a section in the book of slogans, 12th century Buddhist slogans called Lojong, which are about how to live more mindfully and more compassionately. But, there's one that says, meditate on whatever provokes resentment. And I give a list of kind of like nasty little things as meditation instructions, basically. It's also a tribute to Tom Lux at the end. It ends with a line by Tom Lux. But so I do give voice to some of those things, lest you think it's all, those who haven't read it yet, they think it's all kind of sweetness and light.
oh, it's textured, yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But thank you for saying that. It's very lovely. Um,
Randall, can we talk a little bit about Renee and
yeah, yeah,
Renee's
yeah, yeah.
function? Yeah, because both of us are using, like Randall said, we both are using animals and archetypes, I guess,
Yeah.
and totem. So what is Renee here? What's he doing?
Yeah, I hope I'm trying to remember if the poems that you're reading, if we get at some of the voles and rats that appear throughout The Fault. Hopefully, if
We
we
can do.
don't, if we only touch on that, you'll at least talk about that.
Mhm.
So Renee, he's not a constant presence by any means. I guess he's, an interlocutor. I mean, he's somebody that I can talk to in a period of extreme isolation, and he's a stand-in for all kinds of other things as well as that. Obviously, that poem that I read, "Regard the others a verb," which is a sort of beautiful phrase that I must have heard from some meditation teacher. It's the antistasis, right? In the Locomotive Cathedral, it's the locomotive. Recognize that we are only who we are in relationship to others. That we are this constant changing being, and it's only through our interaction with the world that there is such a thing as a self. And so, there's this thing of looking at Renee and wanting him to be my buddy and wanting him to eat out of my hand and wanting to have an Instagrammable relationship, or I'm teasing a little bit, but you know what I mean. If you look at my Instagram feed, it's loaded with stuff like that because I'm fascinated by those kinds of relationships. So much want and how to live with that want, and what to make of the projections that we have on others, be they animals or people. Um, yeah, the book closes with a sort of a concrete poem about Rene when I thought he perhaps had died. Rene is kind of amazing because he'll disappear. I sold the place that I lived where I met Rene, but my neighbors text me updates, and they recently said, and of course they don't want to tell me, but they said, he was gone for like 6 weeks and he's back with his family. But so when I was just getting to know him in that first year, again, it's this, it's the negativity bias. It's our preparing ourselves for the worst, which is it's a very good proclivity in humans, but it also gets in the way of a lot of pleasure and living in the moment. So when Mario finally got to DC after he'd been separated all this time, I was so eager for him to meet Rene, but Rene disappeared. He didn't show up.
Jealous.
And so I was like, oh my God, it's jealousy or he's dead or all this stuff. Well, no, actually he showed up, but he just looked awful. He looked awful, and I thought he was dying, and he wasn't. But so he bookends the book, and then he does appear several other times as a kind of stand-in for the reader, the you that I'm addressing, and other aspects. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I use animals here, and I use them in at least 2 or 3 different ways. And the poem that I'll read next is called The Cost of Art. And in it, I have really, the speaker really has grown attached to the cover photo, which is a whale.
Can you show it?
You know what? I don't
You don't
have
have
it
it.
with me. My family forbade me to sell it in Texas.
Oh,
And
right.
it talks about sex.
Yeah.
So
That's a whole other story.
anyway, and so it has the image of a print that I actually bought, and the artist is Avital Kanani, and she's a sculptor, and she also does prints. And I'll read this poem about the picture, but in it there is this image that could be a whale, and this image just jumped out, and I had dreams about it, and it became some constant companion in life, kind of like Renee, except with mine really was a companion. It wasn't really like it was somebody who had my side. It was somebody who listened. It was somebody who was there with me. And I'll try to end with others. I often felt like the storyboard, it's such a weird situation to feel that you are a metaphor or you're a symbol or you're a projection and you're not a real human to other people. And so some of mine are instances in which, the speakers literally turned into a rodent or a roach, and they're being seen like that. And so it's not quite like Kafka's metamorphosis. It's a different kind of metamorphosis, but it's really, really startling and strange. So along with the arc of mine, and so I find that sometimes just leaning into that was helpful because it allows, there's some mild domestic abuse in this as well, and it allows you to zoom out and to look at this from a more objective point of view, to make it less hot, to make it less so that you can look at it and then you can create, looking at something with more objectivity allows you not to overwhelm the reader or yourself, and it just allows for more dimensions here. So I will read now The Cost of Art, and this is about the cover. Okay. Arik at the Jerusalem Print Workshop shows us something the cost of this month's mortgage payment. The cost of painting the walls in the 2 girls' bedrooms and the accent walls in the kitchen and on the staircase. The cost of my brand new full suspension mountain bike, which I cannot afford, but since the truck hit me, I need if I want to continue to share the man's fondest dreams. For the cost of 2 blood transfusions, or half the cost of a cesarean section. The print is like a blue whale in the blue sea, like rocks hidden in the waves, like a flag without a country, Its surface is scarred and scratched. It is a limited edition, one of 12. I had loved more this artist's black and white dandelion moon, or her scratchy weather, or her gossiping wheat, which takes 3 entire panels to finish its news, but the man says they're too dark for the wall, so we look only at the blue, sea-like, whale-like, mountain-like print with the flag without a country. My friend Jane has bought giant paintings for half the price of the large leather sofa the man bought with his ex-wife and gave away when I moved in. For half the cost of the rug that he also bought with her that I'm making him sell. We had come seeking a long, narrow painting to put on the staircase that joins our 2 floors, but though the space would fit the print, Arik shows us, no one could see more than half the print at a time because of how the staircase slices back and forth. To pay for a print that no one can see more than half of costs the same as half your new top quality refrigerator, I tell the man. He says I'm the one paying for it so I can do what I want. He says he's just telling me what he thinks. I tell him I agree with what he thinks. After 2 years, it was clear that if we didn't act, something would die. This is how a couple acts, he says. They get married, they bike mountains together, they buy art together. Why couldn't I just say thank you and be happy when someone offers me a home, he asks. I do agree with what he thinks, that the shape of the wall is most fit for a long, narrow print that no one can see. But the shape of the eye is another thing. This is a good example of fate or physical attraction or love, the meeting of 2 compatible dysfunctions. And it is why after we pulled over the car yesterday on the way home to Tel Aviv from the print gallery because we were fighting so hard we could not pay attention to the road, we held each other all night in sheets that cost 1/8 of the price of the print. And they're polished cotton sheets, 1,000 thread count, that I bought severely discounted at Century 21 in New York the summer before I met the man. We held each other all night. I stroked his face as if it were the stone in the print we hadn't yet decided to buy, and slid my thigh between his thighs like the hidden whale that I am absolutely certain is shaking its tail through the kelp in that blue print in the Jerusalem workshop in its long metal tray in the gray cabinet as the moon rises over the hills through the arched windows.
I tell him I agree with what he thinks. I do agree with what he thinks. This question of manners and accommodation and niceness, it's something that comes up in your book, right? I mean, it's interesting. And domesticity is a big part of this poem and quite a few of the poems. You know, I'm thinking of what's it called? The Twig? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the twig. Yeah.
And that's another thing, of course, that connects our books because, you know, I don't have maybe my domesticity is mostly limited to laundry, but laundry appears inordinately in my book. I didn't realize it when I finished it, but it does. It's throughout the book, references to laundry.
So are you going to read that one?
I will read that one, but I just want to see if there's anything, maybe, you know, since people can't see the piece of art, are there other places in the fault where the whale comes back?
Yes.
Yeah.
It comes back, the whale comes back toward the end, and I could, it's a bookend, it's at the end. This is written in a narrative arc, and it isn't a surprise that the relationship dissolves here, but it comes back with the framing of it's called The Wedding Gift, and I can read that. It's short. It's much
Okay.
shorter. The Wedding Gift. The print that began the ending of my marriage was so gorgeous.
I'd forgotten how gorgeous it was in real life, laid out on the examination table as the framer and I took measure of what lay before us. The paper itself and the textures alive and breathing. The whale inside it shook a bit and swished, but it might have been the waves brushing against a stone, or it might not have been water at all. Just strange birds in the Negev against a blue and white sky about to blink off without the fanfare of sunset. Tears burst when my fingertips brushed it. The framer also cleared his throat upon sliding it from the canister and unfolding it across the table. He touched the ragged edges and caressed the signature. "Print 1 of 12, he whispered. Every time he touched it, he asked permission as if we were lovers. "May I remove it from its box? May I spread it out?" The framer is going to Montenegro for a week, so he'll have it ready on Friday. Once home, I undress and wait in bed, the sheets and covers indeterminate colors of green, for the dream to return to the point it left off the last time I touched it. Then I was swimming all night through the air, sand, water that was the page of the print. And while nothing in particular happened, it was the nothing particular that happens when you walk on a strange and beautiful landscape for the first time, or the nothing particular that ends a marriage. Then every leaf and every water drop and every strange flower is a happening.
Beautiful. Really beautiful. Yeah, I'm glad you read that one. And it reminds me of the introduction to us about just sort of the kind of attention as a form of prayer, and very the Simone Weil quote.
Yeah. Yeah, that was beautiful, Lisa, with the quote about the attention as a form of generosity
and prayer. Yeah, I mean, I have that in my book also. Yeah, thank you for reading that. And it's such a contrast to the other animals of voles and roaches and rats that appear in there. So it's interesting. My domesticity, I'll sort of give you the example with this one, which After the Ecstasy of the Laundry, which is the title of a book by Jack Kornfield. And it's very much a COVID poem because it was inspired by these lengthy walks I took most days during the pandemic. When I was lucky enough to have my daughter with me, we would do it together, sometimes 5 miles at a time, exploring different neighborhoods, but often I was doing it by myself. And so this poem grew out of those walks. After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. Window caulk cracking, door padlocked. Another laundromat is closing. How far will people have to drive their dirty bedspreads? Headlights in daytime, snaking in slow caravans, black hefty bags in the back seat, to some suburban strip malls, sit and spin. My years of hoarding quarters, jam jar maracas, are over. Wheeling my wet load past oversized peepholes as I eye the red minutes, over. I don't have a private chapel devoted to laundry, as seen on HGTV, just an in-unit WD. And so must most neighbors. Do I miss laundromats? Maybe I miss the locker room-like looking, the furtive interest surely shared, given the rule to never air. Maybe I miss balling socks, folding underwear, quickly concealing the crotch on a long table where so many strangers' boxers, nightgowns have rested. Any raised surface can be an altar, a place to kneel, side by side, mouths open to receive, eyes fixed ahead, staring into a sleeve. Another laundromat is closing, and I'm wistful for some imagined leveling, there but for the grace gone, forgetting there's always been drop-off, and laundresses, like silent confessors to pound stone, wring river, inhale the steam of hot metal, communing with cotton. From a stacked dryer in the closet, I carry my tangled heap to the bed, spilling as I go. Is it lonely? Only as much as meditation. Fishing and folding, I think, justice, like laundry, is never over, which feels profound, until in a bookstore I discover I'm not the first to find wisdom at the bottom of a hamper. Maybe it's not how we do it, but that we all do, cycling through the stink and stain of it. An idea so soft from billions of washings, you can't help wanting to wear it.
Mm, mm. Wow, this is the most beautiful laundry poem I've ever read because it is such an intimate act. And the fact that you do it in public and everyone can see
Your
your
holy underwear. I mean, not
underwear.
yeah, with holes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I, there's something really beautiful about this act of intimacy with strangers in a distance, in a sanction, in a public place. And, as you point out in the poem, laundry was always this way because, women used to do this on the rivers and pound stones and bad thing. In my other book, A Mouthful of Seeds, I talk a lot about laundry and the introduction of the washing machine. So I
Oh,
also
right.
love this too. The
Mm.
washing machine was introduced at the same time as the top 40 music chart. And I kind of figure that there's a coincidence there. But there is something that is so elemental about domesticity and housework and so loving and so also weird about it, right? Where the objects that you're folding become stand-ins, especially in your poem, for the people. And, there's that beautiful Richard Wilbur poem about love calls us to the things of this earth.
Mm.
It ends with, he's looking at the laundry on the line and, imagining the souls descending into,
Mm.
and and this is the feeling that we get here with this one. So much of the domesticity in these poems are really about relationships, not in your poems, they are about relationships with the broader community
Yeah.
and the communal domestic, which is really nice because a lot of your work also is set in Washington, D.C. And, you've grown up there and you were there. I know your parents had one of the first nightclubs and like so like from the beginning and like
Yeah.
you really know this intimately and so your domestic poems really do bring out a lot of the background of Washington and the communities that you've lived in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's true that there's a slightly different angle on the domesticity in the fault and Locomotive Cathedral, because the domesticity in the fault is so much about gender and about relationship and about, you know, yeah, disproportionate shares of labor. And again, the writer's need for things to belong to them and be sacred and not be, trespassed and things like that. And that kind of, yeah, that about the household generally. And I think certainly this poem, I don't know what other poems in Locomotive Cathedral, but yeah, there's a kind of a public, the fact that we do so little publicly and together anymore in a way, because we can always stare at a screen rather than engage with people. So I think that may come up. I'd have to think about that more. But it is interesting how much, and in your book, so much gardening, because you are a passionate and fantastic gardener. I've seen so many of the images of the things you grow. And so gardening and composting and our relationship to death through gardening as a metaphor appears in the fault, quite a bit.
Yeah,
Right?
I grew up on a farm, as I said. And so when we talk about gardening, I have an urban garden. So I have two garden plots. So one is 40 square meters for vegetables and one is 40 square meters for trees. And I almost don't buy vegetables. So, or fruit most of the time. Onions, I don't grow, or potatoes, but other things, yeah. So,
Amazing. Well, you're the only person I know who grew up on a rice farm. So for me, you're an exotic an exotic and beautiful beast. So
Thank
yeah. So that's I
you.
think we were talking about maybe one thing I wanted to touch on is for people who are here, many of whom are probably writers and interested in the formal aspects of our work. Both of our books have a ton of prose in them.
Mhm.
But you often write poems, syllabic poems, verse poems, not prose, but in using syllabics. Did you do that in The Fault?
You know what? In the vault, I'm trying to remember. I think so. One of my practices is um, at least in the book, The City of Sky Papers, that one was written, that was the previous book, and that one was written when I had a daily habit of running before the accident. And so every day I would run and then I would come home and I would just write randomly everything I saw and everything I
Oh, yeah.
experienced. And it was about time. And so I did this riding my bike, riding the bus to school. And so it was about biological time, eternal time, sacred time, secular time, holiday, that kind of time, plant time, human time,
I
geological.
love that poem. Sorry to interrupt, but what's the poem? What I saw today? What's it called?
Yeah, to get here today.
To
My
get here today. Oh my
So
God,
the
that's such a
prompt I
great
gave
poem.
myself was to get here today, I had to.
Yeah.
And I broke those down into either syllabics or I broke them down into octava rima, because I wanted to winnow out the inessential. And you might think, oh, this poem is going to be about blah, blah. But when it comes down to it and you say, I can only keep 13 of these syllables. Which ones are they going to be? It
Mm.
makes you really figure out what's the most important part of that line and what's important there. And so that was the practice for that. I've kept that practice for a lot of my books. And even though this book is in prose and prose block, and part of that reason was because I felt like I didn't have space for myself in this house. I was living in a house with, four children that didn't belong to me, and we didn't have my own room, and I was trying to teach, and I was, like, it was very, very cramped, and I felt like I don't have space even for a line break because a line break takes a lot of time to figure out where it goes. And
Yeah.
so this book is in prose blocks. So, what I did is I did use the syllabic technique, and sometimes I did write them in octava rima or rhyme. And my next book, we'll read a poem from that one. That one is really much more, it's constrained much more by sound, by
Mhm.
internal rhyme. So I did that, and then I smashed my beautiful syllabic poem into a prose block.
Mm.
So you can't see that it was ever a poetic form. And I'm going to read the poem The Fault, which is even justified, right? And this
Yeah.
one is going to be, it is something that I did. I used syllabics to weed out the stuff that wasn't essential. It does talk about domesticity, it talks about gendered relationship, kind of thing. And it also is one in which, well, this is one where I'm just leaning into it a little more. And this is the title poem, The Fault. One morning on her way, the wife felt a little fault nipping at her ankle. She bent to the path through the dry grass, and there it was, all alone and lost. Whose fault are you, little one? She asked, but the fault just began to cry. She stood there waiting, but no one came to claim it. So she picked it up. All day, through the city, in the library and classrooms, in the salary department and HR, among the crates of last-minute onions in the corner grocery store, no one had lost the fault. No one was looking for it. When the husband met her on the bench, she said, I found your fault. You dropped it on the way to the public. No, no, said the husband. This isn't my fault. I'm afraid it's yours. You must have dropped it when you were shaking out the tablecloths or else attempting to accidentally break the faux crystal plastic pitcher my mother gave us for our beautiful new home. But as it was plastic, it only pretended to break. This is surely your fault. No, it's not my fault, said the wife. Perhaps it's your mother's fault. She might have left it with the faux crystal plastic pitcher she bought for our beautiful new home. But it was not his mother's fault. Nor was it his father's fault, for his father had not brought with him his collection of faults when they had visited during the last minor holiday. They had not been accustomed to celebrating and had not even brought any pretend faults to parade. That's probably where it came from, said the woman. It fell out of step in the parade. She felt sorry for the fault and decided to keep it. She wrapped it in her arms and fed the fault a little leftover fish from the too much she was said to have prepared. The fault found the fish delicious, and soon it was fast asleep in the bed that belonged to the husband and wife. The wife hoped it would sleep all night and not wake them up too early in the morning.
I
So,
love that. I love this. I mean, this is something you do so well. There, there's a strangeness to the language that I think I mean, it's both fairy tale like, where, abstractions come to life, but it also has a kind of, like you said, almost written by a child, and some of the affect one might get from translating. You know what I mean? Like the strangeness of translation, how sometimes you can't make things sound idiomatic. Everything here sounds very idiomatic, but also the repetition, about the picture, about just the word the fault. I mean, everything about it is hypnotic and fantastic. It reminds me of that, oh God, I'm blanking on, there's that really weird movie that came out years and years ago. I think it's Eastern European, where they have like a turnip and it becomes a monster, a little.
Otosonic, it's probably Otosonic it's a,
Yeah, I guess it comes from an actual fairy tale. Anyway, they made it into a movie. It's like called Little. Somebody on the chat will know, or I'll try to find the name of it. Anyway, it reminds me a bit of that. Only it's not a vegetable matter, but an
yeah,
abstract noun,
thanks.
which is a great abstract noun for the name of the book, because it has two meanings, like
Yeah,
cleave. So it's, I
yeah,
mean, not the same as cleave, but fault. Somebody's at fault, and then a fault line, which is what we're seeing in this relationship that is dissolving in the course of the book.
right.
So, yeah.
But you know what? We were talking about form when I read that, and I was just thinking that I used much more of devices like puns that moved and that took on, human form. Your use of constraint, you actually use sonnets in this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because like a lot of us during the pandemic, I was an ignoramus. I didn't realize the brilliance of Diane Seuss until Frank sonnets. I went back and read her earlier books, but I got so turned on to the sonnet through Diane Seuss's book, Frank. Um, and my sonnets, can't hold a candle to anything in that book. But I just the constraint of it, like you, I like the expansiveness of prose. I came to Locomotive Cathedral after 9 years of writing mostly like 20-page essays, personal essays, lyric essays. So coming back to poetry was like, I had the two things I had to, like Locomotive Cathedral, the tension between these two things. There was the sort of expansiveness of prose still calling me, like you said about, what it allowed you in this constrained household to kind of bust open, to break down the walls. And so for me, I still had that draw towards the expansiveness of prose. And I also was interested in, okay, but how can I constrain myself? you know and so the sonnet can become almost like an addiction. It becomes like a tick. You start turning everything into a 14 line. And again, for those online who haven't read a lot of sort of contemporary sonnets, which I doubt are many, but it doesn't have to rhyme. It's really just 14 lines, and there's kind of a turn in the middle, well, the eighth line or so. It's a fairly loose structure, but it's a structure, and it has a kind of and it's also very meta, and it often talks about its own constraint. And I have a sonnet that does that, and certainly Diane Seuss has a very famous one. The sonnet teaches what you can do without. So, like poverty. So yeah, I did use sonnets, and like you, a lot of prose.
Mhm. Did you want
Um,
to read?
yeah, well, I don't know if I could read a sonnet, but I guess that would be apropos, right? I was thinking of reading one of the slogans, but I'll read
You
a
can,
sonnet.
you know what? Why don't you read the slogan? Because
Okay.
you have two constraints going on. You've got the sonnets,
Yeah.
We all know what sonnets are. The slogans, I think, are a little more strange and exotic. So maybe, can you
Yeah, I'll
talk a
read
little?
one. Yeah, I'll talk. So I mentioned briefly that,
Good.
so yeah, I have a meditation practice, and I teach a course called Compassion Cultivation Training, which is, it's a secular course and it's developed at Stanford, but it does draw on Tibetan Buddhism. And it's because of that that I was introduced by one of my teachers to Lojong, which is, most people date it back to the 12th century when it was compiled in a certain way, these 59 slogans. The number can vary, but nowadays often we talk about 59 slogans to promote sort of more mindfulness, less self-grasping, and a more kind of compassionate outlook. But because, and just the fact that they're even called to, I mean, I don't know the translation, but people pretty much call them slogans, not aphorisms, not, they're called slogans. I was like, oh my God, slogans from the 12th century. That's cool. And then some of them, when I started looking at them more carefully, they had that awkward, strange, translated feel that once you understood what was behind it, like you read a commentary about the slogan, you could get it. But the ones that drew me first off were the ones that used limbs in the title as a way of talking about our proclivities or defects. So, for instance, this one, slogan 38, don't seek others' pain as the limbs of your own happiness. Very odd. Anyway, so I'm going to read that one. It's short, and I'm going to say to you that it's a persona poem because I don't want to admit to some of the feelings of this speaker. Don't seek others' pain as the limbs of your own happiness. Schadenfreude is my house coat, a little frock I throw on for modesty's sake, your safety. Because let's face it, I'm a knockout. Got gams like a Venn diagram, a fist like a fetal position. My pleasure peaks from three-quarter sleeves as I reach for a tray of bite-sized sausages. Just look at my backstroke. I'm a water wheel, catching your fall, grinding you into bread. My corpuscles are pink slips, my liver, all you cannot forgive in yourself. Give me your stooped, your sorry, give me a head hanging, and I'll make a step stool. Take a low blow and give me my pneumatic lift. So that's a short one of the slogan poems. But just to give you a taste, I'm not going to read more poems necessarily, but like to give you a taste of, slogan 25 is don't talk about injured limbs. And that just means don't talk about other people's defects as a way of like making yourself sound better. Like if you criticize others, you sort of try to lift yourself up by saying you're not like them in some way. So those are just some examples that drew me to the idea, much like the etymology poems that I did in Provenance, picking a word and seeing where its long and bizarre etymology, all of the languages and changes it went through over time, where it would take me if I let it. Similarly, I tried to use these slogans as a way to talk about whatever, wherever they took me. So they were just kind of pathways, I would say. So yeah,
Lovely.
how are we doing time-wise?
You know what, Brandel? I think we might want to you want to
Read.
just read a piece from a new book that we're working
Yeah, I do want to talk briefly about
on.
new work and before
Okay.
we open up to
I think we've
questions.
got like 5 minutes for.
Yeah. So Marcel and I had a chance to talk beforehand, and again, synchronicity. I think both of us are working on or have manuscripts in progress that have a sort of spiritual angle in some way. So Locomotive Cathedral has a section based on these slogans. The book that I'm working on now is going to be loosely organized around something in Buddhism called the Five Remembrances, which are just, I mean, it sounds kind of, this body is of a nature to grow old. This body is of a nature to get sick. This body is of the nature to die. I will be separated from everything I've ever loved and known, and nothing will last except, my deeds, basically. I'm paraphrasing in a very loosely. So that's kind of the organizing idea, but I'll read one new poem from that. What would I hope will be that book? You never know, right? So this one just recently appeared in the Cincinnati Review, and it's called Counterclockwise. And it starts with an epigraph that's about a study. So I'll read that first. Counterclockwise. In the 1979 counterclockwise study, 8 elderly men were asked to spend a week together at a retreat staged to look, feel, and sound like 1959. The men all, quote, showed dramatic improvements in their hearing, memory, dexterity, appetite, and general well-being. And that is a real study, a fascinating study by the queen of positive psychology. So I'll begin that one counterclockwise. Cover me in the blue film of new appliances. Let me be freshly delivered and undented. I want to feel the peel again, the satisfying suck climaxing to gleam. Or do I? Maybe I'm finally getting used to memory foam, the way everyone looks like someone I once knew, the awkward nakedness of faces without place or era. It's all about context. Design me a ramshackle rental with futons on the floor, fist holes in the kitchen drywall, the Ramones on the turntable, and Reagan, our biggest worry. If I can spend 5 days there with college friends, my hip will stop throbbing, and with my deaf ear, I'll hear cocaine travel through a straw down the hall. There are advantages. When I say softening, I'm not talking flesh, although that too, but of opening to the dull and daily. I'm done with disparaging the sparrows, resisting repetition, unless, of course, it's my husband asking me to repeat myself. Even the workout video I've grunted through 100 times, I still smile at the couple's banter. Even Claudia's breaking a sweat. Don't get me wrong. I'm as impatient as always, and also, could it be, more forgiving. Protective foil, long peeled, sure, I miss the moment of reveal, but I'll settle for steel's opposite, apply myself to becoming less solid, the slow dissolve, so porous, gossip, resentment, envy, words flow right through me. And whatever song you decide to sing, I'll know all the lyrics. We'll sing along, like my dead mother-in-law, with a split-second delay, faking the tune a little with such elation.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. I won't say anything about it because this is the first time I'm hearing it myself. But
You heard it here first, folks.
I'm working on a book that started a while back. There's a practice, it's an obscure practice in Judaism that you count the Omer, you count and you say a special blessing between the second day of Passover and Shavuot, which is 40 days later. These are agricultural holidays. They're also spiritual holidays, symbolizing, the wandering in the desert of the Jews between, the end of Passover and receiving the Torah in Sinai. And so those are, two different ways to do this. And so I started off, I can never remember to count them, so I decided to try to do a poem a day. This began, though, each of these days has a significance, a spiritual significance, where you're trying to combine things like grace and discipline, or loving kindness and boundaries. And so it is a way to work on your own spiritual connection and the manifestation of the divine in the world. And so this book is called I think it's going to be called Woman Counting. I'm not sure. This might be the first poem in it. It's called Ein Sof. It's infinity without end. And it is talking about, just our human, everybody, I think everybody has encounters with, the beyond life or the pre-life at some point in our lives. And so this is sort of that. I'll just start into it. My sister once slept with the closet light on. We once shared a bed. One night the bulb burned bright and drew close to the hinge of the door. What was before the beginning? How could something have never begun that would never end? For weeks I lay awake and woke my parents when the dread grew too great for our bed. Everyone said, "Wait until I'm dead and then I'll understand." This is the point beyond which our comprehension cannot go. When we turned off the closet light, I could sleep again. Nothing is infinite. There is no time and space. Nothing gathers all its power, the first contraction. In the space it made, that wasn't its nothingness, before was born, then after. Simone Weil says the ego, like a gas in a vacuum, takes up all the space it is given.
Mm.
It isn't natural to withdraw. To be human is to take up space. To be divine is to contract, that another might be. This is called grace.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow.
So
Really
that
beautiful.
thanks. That one just came out in the Michigan Review, and I hope that, yeah.
Yeah. We can only hope that those will be part of a book. Yeah. Can't wait. Do we want to open it up for, does anybody have, what time, or how are we doing, folks? We're pretty good, right? We have time for questions?
Okay.
We do have time for questions. We've had 2 so far. Becca, do you see them there in the chat?
I do, from Barbara, right? The first question was, since you both write prose along with poetry, I'm interested in how you choose between the two. What do you think draws you to one over the other or the other? And then if you want to answer that, I will prep you with the second part of the question, which is why do you write? Which is, I think, a big question, but also a great question.
Mhm. Mhm.
So who wants to go first?
You go, Marcela.
Um, can I start with the second question about why you write? And I'm going to say this. When I was growing up in a rice farm in South Texas, there was no book that described the world I lived in. Um, we didn't have snow. I am so remote. I didn't see an elevator till I was in high school. There was an escalator in the Victoria Mall, and like, so there was the books that we read, Lyle Lyle Crocodile, that was so exotic, not because of the crocodile, but because of this New York, in the apartments. People lived in apartments. That was weird. And so I started to write also because there were a lot of stories. Like I lived with my grandparents were nearby, and they were telling stories, and they spoke Czech. They were Czech speakers. And so I learned that my parents learned English in school. And so like there were just all these stories, and I wanted to write about things that I saw and heard every day. They didn't feel, Randall, you were joking that it's kind of exotic, but it felt so mundane. What was exotic was like snow or maple leaves, and that's kind of why I started to write. Yeah. I don't know if you want to talk about
Well,
that.
and also, I mean, you have
Yeah.
a book called Immigrant. I mean, a lot of your work deals with that kind of dislocation of being the other, you know. So I can see why that would be a motivation to write yourself towards belonging or, to try to figure out what that dividing line is and if it's real. And gosh, I don't know, that's a tough one. Why do I write? I think it's to slow down time.
Mm,
And I don't, I'm not, I'm writing in prose a lot, but I am not a storyteller. And for me, it's capturing moments, images, and then associatively stringing them together is as close as I can get to storytelling. And so that's kind of what poetry is for me. And also, this is going to sound kind of hokey. I'm a Libra, so I like to keep balance. And I think that, I use writing to weigh things and to be able to go back and forth and to say this, yes, but also this. And so my writing in general is a kind of a zigzagging. And so it's a thinking through how it can be both and.
mhm.
I don't know if
And
that's helpful. Go, you want to go for the other
I
part?
really like your idea about slowing down time. And I kind of feel that that is definitely what we do when we write, and we make a note. This happened, right? Um, I keep a journal. I keep a
Mm,
daily journal, and so for that's part of it. The difference between poetry and prose might be exactly as you said, Brandel. Poetry, it is about tempo, I think, more than it is about content or story or not. Poetry is a way to examine, for me, I mean, obviously there are exceptions to this rule, but it's a way of thinking through something where I don't know where I'm gonna land yet, and I'm not sure what I'm thinking. And so poetry is not for me most of the time deductive reasoning or reasoning. It is more examination and linking, and it's making connections.
mhm.
Prose is kind of almost the opposite in the sense that it is reasoning for me. And so when I don't write fiction so much, I write more nonfiction.
Mhm.
And when I use prose for that, I am discriminating. I'm cutting out things. I'm creating a hierarchy of thought, or at least of, sometimes I use collage. I use collage a lot, but in a certain sense, you are doing cause and effect. You are using temporal sequencing, whereas in the poetry, everything kind of happens all at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There are exceptions, and there's experimental prose, but in a way, I think that's kind of what I intuitively do.
Yeah, and our prose, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I suspect if you, one, we're looking at our prose, it's inflected so much by poetry that it's not
It's
prose
either
in the
or,
way
right?
that, yeah, it's kind of, so, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. How about you? Is that kind of like the same for you, or do you, Brandel? Yeah.
Um, well, no, everything you said, absolutely, I agree with it. Yeah. I mean, there's prose that's like academic is one thing, and then the kinds of prose that we write, as I said, I think they're more, it has usually has such associative leaps and lyricism that it's more about, well, why is it not lineated?
Mhm.
Basically, it's sort of unlineated poetry in a way. Um,
Although sometimes I am writing to make an argument or a point,
yeah,
to say I want to know the history of the washing machine, or I want to know what it's like to live in a metaphor, and what do I mean, and like, so sometimes I do examine something in particular, but I usually know what it is I'm going to examine when I write prose, and I don't always know what it is I'm examining. Poetry is more slant. I think I'm talking about, Renee, but I'm really talking about loneliness, right? So yeah.
yeah. Again, all that can happen in prose too. I
Yeah.
think I think for me, I don't have a book of pure prose like you do. I have a whole collection of essays that were not published as a collection. They were published individually. But, the when I include prose in a book of poems, it's because I like that textural variation. I like the kind of matter-of-factness that prose can have and the way it creates a textural contrast with, a very compacted lyric next to it. And I sort of like that. That may not be everybody's cup of tea, but that's something that I like, just as in, you're not the same person you are with every friend, right? You're different. And so there's something about that variation, that just appeals to me. Anybody else have any other questions, or you want to close it up, or?
I think we actually don't have any additional questions, but would love it if you would each maybe read a final poem before we close out. Um,
Yeah, that would be great. Do you want to read something new or something from the books? How do we feel?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
I want to read something new.
Okay.
I'm going to read The Spell. It
Mhm.
just came out in the Southern Review, and I want to read it because I like it.
Okay.
And it's a prose poem. And it starts with an epigraph from Reuters. Reeling from one heat wave, Mexico awaits highest temperatures ever recorded. The monkeys have been falling from the trees for weeks. This morning, my friend texted a gif of a woman standing on a pier. Again and again, she tosses a sheet and pillow onto the surface of the water and dives in. It's too hot to dream. There's only the fever dream of leaving my house to walk the empty streets to the corner store. In spite of this, my watch registers no REM and no deep sleep. In a curtained room, I read the news, which is a way to stay distracted, still. A month ago, they found a woman living inside the sign over a family fare supermarket. This was in Michigan, where it must be cool. She had a laptop, a printer, a coffee maker, and a houseplant. Here, everything confined to a pot is shriveled, in shock, trapped like people by their borders under attack. They're at risk of dying. When will it rain? Every year, later and less, the reprieve from desert growing shorter, brown is the new black. In a curtained room, I read the news, which is like scratching bug bites until they become welts. Better to simply note the hot, tingly urge and be still. As dry as it is, the mosquitoes are alive, feeding and laying eggs. Are they my exemplars? Forgive me if I'm buzzing in your ear. It's not as though I won't survive this heat, which is seasonal and exceptional. In 5th grade, Steve promised me a ring. I remember the hot, tingly anticipation, then finally receiving the ring, exceptional in its ugliness, fake gold with a white and blue enamel nautical motif, maybe an anchor with rope around it. I put it on my finger and used it to scratch "I hate this ring" into the puce wall of the bathroom stall. Sometimes aversion is raised and inflamed. Other times it incises itself. Did I mention the frangipani? They're in full bloom, a fragrance I can best describe as gardenia crossed with raid. I bury my nose in them, inhaling deeply every time I pass by. Yesterday, in our oven on wheels, while stopped at a light, I saw a man straddling a parked motorcycle under a shade tree. A little girl sat behind him, swinging her ashy legs on either side of the bike and licking an ice cream cone. A rivulet of vanilla traced her chin. The father, patient, stoic, not even looking at his cell phone, wore a small pink Barbie backpack on his chest. Thank you.
Wow, the cross between raid and Great. Brandel, do we want something funny or something more about God? No.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
God
know.
Fritz.
Funny?
Funny. Okay. This one, it's still about God, but this is from the section that I'm thinking about called Gevora, which is strength of judgment, and it's usually understood as God's mode of punishment, founded on strict adherence to the letter of the law, is in fear of God. And it also means limits or boundaries. And this is in the 2nd week of counting. When God said, "Let there be firmament," the world kept stretching and expanding until God said, "Enough." And so it came to a standstill. This poem is called The Past Lives of God. God's pronouns: God, they, theirs. Asherah's pronouns: she, they, her. When God was single, singular, God's name was El, though none of us ever used that name. It was before our time. After God had partnered up with Asherah, God changed God's name to Elohim, which is plural. Others called them Elohim and their Asherot. The man and I had the same discussion. I was surprised it came up. He would like me to take his name when we exchange rings, and I would like to retain my name. The man didn't press, though he pointed out his ex-wife had gamely discarded her name and had taken on his. Nothing happens if you do that. Now she's reverted to her maiden name, so to speak. It still fits, even after 4 children. I agree. The name looks great on her. It doesn't show much wear or tear. One of my friends actually received a holiday card from a family member addressed to Mr. and Mrs. the name of her husband and her husband's last name. Elohim was in high tech and Asherah was an artist. She was a weaver. She wove all of Yahweh's clothes and folded the night sky. Asherah's maiden name was Lady Who Walks on the Sea. Her maiden name was Chava. Her maiden name was Elonai Mamre, and she used to live in Eden. The man and I agree it's good to divide up duties. He takes care of the bills and I cook. However, he also likes to cook. And it's fine if I'm in charge of the kitchen, but he needs the dishes to be in these specific places. And it's too much to have both milk and meat dishes, if only I didn't care so much. God created light and placed one in the night and one in the day, and these lights were little godlings. They were so bright and willful that God trapped them in orbs to keep them still, like fireflies inside of jelly jars. Then God called them lights, not godlings. When not appearing in time and space, Elohim was called Havaya, all the conjugations of the verb to be. Havaya never said there were never not other gods. They only requested that we not have no gods above them. Actually, Havaya, aka Yahweh, phrased it like this: they don't want any other gods in their face. The kids of this city don't care. God can be asexual, bisexual, omnisexual, gay, straight. It's God's body or God's not body. They can do or not do with it or in it or outside of it what they want. Asherah and Elohim went to Sinai. I'm not sure what really happened there, but she was never seen again after that. Adam and Lilith also broke up, and he's with Eve now. Okay, that's that. That's the comic relief for that one. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And there you are. And Becca. And thank
Yeah.
you, Brandel. This was absolutely a delight.
Yes, we wanted to again thank you so much for your time tonight, and um, just wanted to let people know, if you enjoyed this event, please follow the Notebooks Collective on our social media accounts and sign up for our newsletter. Lisa already put those links in the chat. And before we go, we'd love it if we could unmute and get a round of applause for our guests. Or you can throw in a nice note in the chat, because we also give them the chat, which is always.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. So we don't have to race through it now. Good.
No.
Sweet. Thank you so much for doing that.
And thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to everybody who attended. It was good to see. I didn't get to see everybody, but I see you now. So wonderful to have folks here, and thanks for bringing us all together and allowing us to just hang out and chat. And it was like, I felt like I was, reading poems to, it's very intimate to be
Yeah.
able to just see the two of us reading to one another. So thank you for that experience.
It was very lovely. Definitely so many, I took little notes, things to reflect upon. So once again, thank you. And to our guests out there, we hope you join us again sometime soon. And we hope that you have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.